Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd and this is my review of the final episode of Star Trek Discovery called Life Itself. And my reaction to it is kind of like Frodo's reaction after the ring was destroyed in Lord of the Rings when he said that it's finally gone and he has like a relief after realizing it's no longer there. So that's kind of what I am feeling right now. And getting through the show and this episode really felt like a chore. And I'm not saying it was all bad, the show did have some good moments here and there, but it had so many stupid and annoying things in it that it was really more bad than good. And I will soon do a review of the whole show as well. I will rank all the seasons. And right now I can say that this season, the final one, was absolutely the worst one of them all. So let's start from the beginning. When we fly into that portal that Michael jumped into in the end of the previous episode, and throughout this episode they keep saying they're scanning the inside of the portal to try to find Michael and all of that. Why don't they say they're scanning the other side of it? Like, if it's a portal, doesn't it lead to some other place? And yet they keep talking about it as if it's literally inside the portal itself. So that was kind of ridiculous. And the camera flies into it and we see like some kind of kaleidoscope kind of special effect similar to movies like Space Odyssey and Interstellar, and this show really desperately tries to be like that, but it's not really succeeding. So Michael wakes up in some kind of magical place which is like an infinite corridor full of windows which shows a variety of all kinds of different planets. And that really reminded me of the Iconians that we saw in TNG. And that Iconian outpost also had a control station with triangles that if you press them the wrong way, then it electrifies you. And the gateways themselves looked really similar in this episode. And so I kept thinking, did the writers confuse the Iconians with the progenitors? And I guess it can be tied together. They can say the Iconians found the progenitor technology as well, and that's why they had those gateways. So anyway, Michael is walking through this infinite corridor and she seems to choose a window at random and goes to the planet on the other side. How does she know she'll be able to come back? I don't know. In this gateway system, it looks as if the gates are constantly open from the side of that planet as well. So anyway, she touches one of those gateways, as always with her bare hands, which is something that was often done in the show. She always touches all kinds of unknown, strange things with her bare hands. And it pulls her into this gateway, and she falls on a planet on which it's raining, and we see there's a Breen there. So that Breen randomly chose that exact same gateway as she did, and also got pulled there. And then they fight hand to hand in the rain, and that really reminded me of that fight scene in Matrix 3 when Neo and Agent Smith were fighting in slow motion in the rain, and here it's also with constant slow motion gimmicks, kind of like the Snyder action scenes that everything has to be in slow motion because it looks more beautiful, and so we have a ridiculous scene like that. Then Michael is saved by a hurricane which sends that Breen flying away, and then she uses that same hurricane to jump up back to that gateway and climb back to that same place she came from. So if those gates are open all the time on all those planets, wouldn't people on those planets manage to get into this place? And so isn't that kind of ridiculous? And the Iconian gateways were shown to be one way in that episode of TNG I mentioned, and so that seems to be more logical. Otherwise, anyone can always get into the command center of the Iconians, and here it seems to be always open on both ends. So she keeps walking in that place, and suddenly she's attacked by yet another Breen, but then that Breen is shot by none other than Shin Hoti, who I guess forgot that she's on the same side with the Breen. She forgot that the Breen are obeying her, so why exactly does she shoot that Breen? I have no idea. And she also seems to be injured in her leg, and so Michael throws her a dermal regenerator to save her. And Shin Hoti magically knows that Michael knows how to solve the last clue because she was given a secret clue in one of the previous clues, and Shin Hoti somehow knows that magically, and so she agrees to cooperate with Michael. And meanwhile we see that Saru is being sent on a diplomatic mission to talk with that female leader of the Breen fleet, Tahal, who is coming with her whole fleet to the same location of those black holes. And remember how I predicted that there's not going to be any huge space battle, that they keep teasing us with it and building it up, and then it will not happen. And I was proven correct once again. It's not really a surprise since they did the same thing in the previous two seasons. They keep building up some kind of galactic space battle, and then they just cop out in the end. So I don't know if they were planning it and then ran out of money, or if it's only done to kind of tease us, to keep us coming back to watch the next episode expecting something interesting, and then it's just not happening. So anyway, he's been sent on a small shuttle without any weapons, and he has to be piloted there by the Yum Yum lady. Why exactly does she need to be the pilot? Cannot he pilot a shuttle? Wasn't he a Starfleet captain not that long ago? So cannot he pilot the shuttle by himself? Why does he need this escort of the Yum Yum lady? Is not clear at all. I guess they just had to find something for her to do. But it's not really necessary. If it's some kind of a suicide mission, as they imply, that it's so dangerous, then what's the point of bringing another person to potentially die? It makes no sense. Then it cuts back to the Infinity Corridor, and suddenly Michael attacks Shin Hoti. After she herself managed to convince Shin Hoti that they should cooperate, suddenly she knocks her out, and then they're fighting in this Infinity Corridor, which has a strange gravity. They're kind of jumping on the walls and all of that, and so visually it's not really that bad, even though it is kind of a jumbled mess, especially since those gateways don't really have defined borders. So it's a little bit jumbled, but I love that visual of that place with all the gateways to the many different planets. We had a scene like that in the Doctor Strange movie, I think, and so I always loved the idea of portals and the teleporting in this way to different places, and all of that is kind of cool. And they jump into a planet that has purple vegetation, which reminds me that we saw a planet like that in an episode of Stargate SG-1 once. So they fight on this purple planet, then they jump back to that corridor, and then they fall to a planet which is all fire. It's a totally fiery place for some reason. This kind of reminds me of the ending of that old movie, The Black Hole, which also had a planet like that, which is full of fire all the time. You know, this will be very useful for a bunch of funny edits that I'm going to make. I'm going to combine it all together and show maybe SG-1 seeing them fight, and then that scene from the Black Hole movie. And so this episode will provide me of a lot of material for a lot of funny edits. And then it cuts to the Discovery fighting the Breen ship, which has sent out a bunch of small fighters, and that's the only space battle in this episode. We're not going to see that giant Breen fleet that was promised in the previous episodes. Instead, we're just going to see those small Breen shuttles attacking the Discovery. Then it cuts back to Michael and Shin Hoti, and suddenly they're out of that fiery planet, even though it was below them. So how exactly did they jump up and manage to get out of there is unclear. So whenever things are unclear, they solve it with editing by simply cutting to something else and then cutting back and hoping we wouldn't notice. So they fell down to that fiery planet and then managed to somehow get out of it magically between takes. And then Michael once again convinces Shin Hoti to stop fighting and cooperating. But didn't we have the exact same scene not so long ago? So she already convinced her previously to cooperate, then she herself, Michael, attacked Shin Hoti, and now is again trying to convince her to cooperate. And the way that Michael manages to convince her to cooperate is by suddenly appealing to her tragic backstory, saying, I also know what it's like to lose people I love and all of that, and that's what convinces Shin Hoti to lay down her weapons again. After Michael already violated their previous ceasefire, she now agrees to again throw down her weapons, and in Discovery's fight against those Breen shuttles, they also conveniently found a pocket of explosive gas near the black hole, which they're going to use against those Breen shuttles. How convenient is that? That there is some random pocket of explosive gas right when they need it to be there. And also Michael magically randomly figures out how to find the control station of that place, because she noticed there's some kind of optical illusion, some kind of strange shadow on the edges of that corridor, so she touches it with her bare hand again, and suddenly she's able to rip open the fabric of reality itself to reveal some kind of other place. Then we see Saru and Yum Yum on the shuttle, and they finally reach the Breen fleet, and they're trying to communicate with it, and of course there's no response. Then we see Shin Hoti and Michael walk through some flowers, and then they get to the control panel of this whole place apparently, and it has a bunch of triangles, which they have to figure out how to put them in the right way to activate this technology. And it's funny that in the previous episode Michael said the Breen will have no way of solving the next clue without that message that she got from the previous clue. Remember that that's why she gave they bring all the clues, because she said, or she thought, there's no way they'll be able to get through the next one without that knowledge that only she had. And that knowledge was that when she was told to make the one out of the many, something like that. And so here, when she sees the triangles, she knows that she has to connect all of them to create a bigger triangle. So that's it. That's the whole puzzle. That's what they need to solve to get to the next level. So that is absolutely ridiculous, because we're talking about something that was left by an ancient, super advanced civilization which existed for billions of years. And they also set up this elaborate way to root out idiots, I guess, to not be able to get their technology. And so that's why they had to get through all those puzzles. I guess it was set up by the scientists, not the progenitors, but still, it was meant to test whoever will get their hands on this technology. So it has to be someone clever, at least. And yet that final puzzle they have to solve is literally like toddler level, basic geometry kind of stuff. Oh, we need to figure out how to put the triangles to form a bigger triangle. And that's it. That's the whole intellectual level that you have to be on to be able to pass this final test. You have to be like above toddler level. You have to be above kindergarten level to be able to get your hands on this technology. And it was made by super advanced civilizations. So it's so ridiculous. And I guess Michael was lucky that Shinhoti was there with her, because when Shinhoti tries to form the triangle, it actually electrifies her, because she did it wrong. They were supposed to put the triangles on the outside of the bigger triangle for it to work. It's stupid how Michael turned her back on Shinhoti, because she suddenly got a message from Book, because Book took a shuttle closer to that portal, so his signal got through, I guess, and so she turned her back on Shinhoti, and then Shinhoti knocked her out, and then tried to activate that panel, and she put the triangles in the wrong way, and it electrifies her. So it's kind of similar to, this whole season has been kind of mimicking the Indiana Jones movies, in which, the villains are chasing after some kind of treasure, but it ends up destroying the villains, and so the same thing kind of happens here. But then Michael saves her. And how does she save her? She sees that Shinhoti is being electrified by that panel. So does she use a stick? Does she use a stone or something to push her out of the way? No, she uses her bare hands again. She puts her bare hands on Shinhoti's electrified body and somehow doesn't also get electrified, but manages to free her from it. And then she puts the triangles in the right way, in which the bigger triangle is on the inside, because it fits what she was told, I guess. And then she gets teleported into the same exact place, only at night time. And then we see a humanoid figure approaching her, and in this point of the episode I was actually a little bit excited, because I thought maybe we'll get to see that same actress who played the original progenitor from TNG. She is still alive. She also played the female founder on Deep Space Nine. Maybe she's not acting anymore, but maybe they can get her voice at least, get her to voice that character again, just like they did with the Borg Queen in Season 3 of Picard, when they got Alice Krige to voice the Borg Queen and use some other stunt double woman to play the body. And so they could do something like that here, at least use the voice of that same actress. Instead they used a totally different actress. I guess it makes sense. It doesn't have to be that same exact progenitor who was in the message. It makes sense that it will be another one, so I don't really have a problem with that. But it's funny to see that the progenitor is now black, because the progenitors also had exactly the same races as we do on Earth. I guess it makes sense if they seeded all humanoid life. Maybe that explains why the same exact races are in all the humanoid aliens, even the Vulcans, even the Kelpians. All the aliens in Star Trek all have exactly the same races as we do. So maybe it's because the progenitors also had the exact same races and they programmed those races into us. And so of course the one that we see in Discovery is black. And then she starts talking with Michael about infinite diversity and all of that. And so that kind of made me facepalm, because, this show is always preaching about diversity and all of that is fine, but what they do themselves in the show is kind of reverse racism at this point, because they always exclude a specific demographic because they're so much for diversity. So that's why it's kind of funny And they did the same thing with trying to promote women so much that they always show, whenever we see a leader of any planet, it's always a woman. And the same thing with Tahal, the leader of the Breen, who finally answers Saru's hail and appears as a hologram in front of him. And then Saru tries to negotiate with her by promising her all kinds of concessions by the Federation, and she refuses. And then he's able to somehow bluff his way into getting her to back off. He basically does it by saying that he has a lot of friends in the galaxy who will attack her unless he tells them not to. And then she calls off her fleet. She completely disappears from the picture. And so they've been building her up this whole season, saying how powerful she is and how big her fleet is, and her entire fleet will come in the last episode. And then Saru just manages to bluff his way out of the situation, and she just retreats and leaves, and there is no big space battle with her fleet, and so that is so ridiculous. And then Yam Yam tells him, remind me never to play Ferengi poker against you, or something like that. And we had the same kind of scene so many times in previous Star Trek shows. One time it was Kira who was bluffing her way against Romulans, and so we had the exact same scene so many times that it's kind of ridiculous, especially since here it was a tiny shuttle with no weapons against a giant Breen fleet, which previously they showed that the whole Federation is terrified of just one Breen ship. And suddenly a Breen fleet is terrified of a small shuttle, so it's absolutely ridiculous. And also that scene of Discovery fighting against those smaller Breen fighters, and suddenly they discover this magical pocket of explosive gas, and then they use it to make all those small Breen ships blow up. That is straight out of Star Trek Insurrection, when Riker used the same maneuver, and that's also something we saw a bunch of times in Star Trek. And so at this point there is nothing original at all being done. It's all been done before and much better than here, because here it makes no sense. This is on the edge of a black hole. Why the hell is there suddenly an explosive pocket of gas right when they need it to be there, and it saves them from the Breen fighters? And when Shinhoti put all those triangles on that panel, it also activated something in that place, which caused that portal to start sucking out energy from the black hole. Because that's what they used, I guess, to power this place, so it was there near the black holes for that purpose. It wasn't because of the Lagrange point of being hidden forever. Instead, they had to use the black holes as an energy source, apparently. And Dr. Kolber also went with Book on that shuttle because he suddenly knew it's something he has to do, and they also have been building up his character to having some kind of spiritual curiosity, and so that's why he had to go with Book on this mission. And he suddenly magically knows what frequency they should use on their tractor beam to be able to lock on that portal, and Book is amazed by that. How would you know that? Did Book forget that this guy was the host of that Trill scientist who was one of those scientists who found the progenitor technology in the first place, and his mind was in Colbert's mind, and so obviously some leftover memory remained in him, and that's how he knew. So why does Book even have to ask that? Isn't it obvious? That's why he knew what frequency to use. And they're both so amazed by that, and they keep fist bumping each other in this whole episode. This is something that happens multiple times in this episode, that people praise each other and pat themselves on the back all the time. Also on Discover's Bridge, when they figured out the idea of using that explosive gas, when Tilly suggested that, someone else said, oh, that's genius. And that's something that keeps happening in this whole episode. Everyone are praising each other all the time. So, you know, the smugness of this show is one of those elements that is really annoying. And then we see Michael is talking with the black progenitor lady, and she basically wants Michael to become the stewardess of this whole place. She wants Michael to control all this power over all of creation. And I was so sure that Michael is going to accept, because that's something I predicted, that how this is how this season will end, that Michael will become a literal god who will control the whole universe, something like that. So I was sure that she will agree, but no, that would be too obvious. That would be too ridiculous even for the writers of the show. And so instead they decided to give Michael some humility, and so suddenly Michael says, no, this power is too much for any one person to control, and I'm not perfect, I have fears, I have doubts, all of that. So at least the writers acknowledge the fact that it was a problem how perfect Michael is, kind of the know-it-all, kind of the best at everything and all of that, which was one of the annoying factors in it. So in this season they kind of tried to pull it back a little bit by suddenly revealing that she does have some flaws, and she acknowledges those flaws and all of that. So the same thing in this scene, when suddenly they try to show that she has some humility, that she's not so arrogant. And then the most ridiculous part was when the progenitor reveals that they actually did not invent any of this technology, they simply found it. That it was made by someone even more ancient than them, that maybe also created them, some older progenitor. And so, what's the point of all of this? That they imply kind of an infinite chain of creators creating their successors and then going extinct for some reason. So it's all kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Obviously, these progenitors were the only humanoid species in the galaxy. That was specifically stated in TNG, that they created all the other humanoids. So they were alone in the galaxy back then, and suddenly they reveal, oh, actually all of this was created by some even more ancient power. And so why? Why did they have to do that? That kind of ruins the whole idea, and it makes this whole season kind of pointless. So in the end of the day, the progenitors were not really the progenitors. They were simply kind of a stepping stone to some more ancient progenitor. I guess maybe they did it to kind of preserve the mystery of it, to kind of keep it unknown who actually created all of life when it wasn't these beings that we see here. And it's also kind of similar to the ending of the movie Contact, when the hero of that movie met those aliens who also had a network of stargates throughout the galaxy, but then that alien reveals to her that they didn't actually make it, they simply found it, and it's a leftover from some even more ancient civilization that is long gone by now and all of that. So it does kind of create more mystery and doesn't answer all the questions. I guess maybe that's why they wanted to do it like that, but it also kind of ruins the whole point of the season. So if we're not going to get any answers to anything, so what was the point of this whole journey, when in the end nothing really is revealed, nothing is solved, we don't really get any new information at all, and so what was the point of all of this if nothing actually changes in the end? And so Michael rejects the offer to become the stewardess of this place, and yet this progenitor still wants to give her a vision, and she kind of puts her hands on her head and gives her a vision, seeing the whole history of the universe and seeing life forming and all of that. And this whole scene is kind of ridiculous. It almost made me laugh because it made me remember all kinds of meme videos I saw. There was one from some documentary of some guy talking about the universe and then showing as if his mind is being blown when he sees the wonders of the universe. And there was a video on YouTube of some cat that suddenly had a transcendence vision and seeing the whole history of the universe, and it had like an amazed look on its face. And so Michael has that same exact look. When she gets that vision, she has that O face. And one of those bits of stock footage they used, I think, is the same exact one we saw not so long ago in Star Wars The Last Jedi, when Rey was being taught by Luke to feel the Force, and then she also saw plants growing from the ground, and it was exactly the same footage. I went back and looked, I double checked, and I saw it's the exact same footage from Star Wars The Last Jedi that we also see here, of those plants growing from the ground, and a bunch of other stock footage. And I will do a lot of parody edits of all of this stuff because it was kind of ridiculous, and I will make it even more ridiculous to be funny. At least I'll get some more entertainment out of this mess by turning it into a better comedy instead of the unintended comedy that it is. And of course, when this vision is over, Michael is also crying. And Michael then tells Shin Hoti that it's impossible to revive Skrull because the progenitor lady told her that even though it is possible to recreate the body, but it will not have any of the same memories of that person. And I think that's another missed opportunity in this episode, because it would have been interesting to see them try it. If Shin Hoti actually tried to revive Skrull and then he turned into some kind of monster, it would be a little bit more interesting. Otherwise, his story is kind of ridiculous. His whole storyline in this season was that he was together with Shin Hoti, then he killed himself by accident because he wanted to help her escape and accidentally killed himself, and that was the end of his story. So that makes him look like a total idiot, and they didn't even revive him in the end. It's also very stupid when Michael asks the progenitor if they can use this technology to revive someone who died, and the progenitor says no. We can make a duplicate of the same body, it will be genetically identical, but it will not have any of the memories of the previous person, and so the person will be lost. And Michael just accepts that and later tells Shin Hoti it's impossible to use this technology to revive someone. But it makes no sense, because even in Discovery itself they show that they now know how to transfer someone's essence, someone's soul from one body to the other. They did that with the Trill, they did that With Gray's consciousness, when they transferred Gray into a robot body, they said they used the same technique that was done on Picard. When Picard transferred himself to a synthetic body, they specifically referenced that in the previous season of this show. And did that with Gray. They revived Gray by transferring Gray's memories and soul to a new body from the previous body. Not to mention all the other times they resurrected people in this very same show. You know, the Doctor was resurrected using the mushrooms when his essence was transferred to the mushroom realm and then came back to a new body. And so even in this show it was possible to transfer people's souls into new bodies. So how come the progenitors who are way more advanced cannot do that when even Discovery itself can? Technically they could have resurrected him all by themselves. They could have simply got him a synthetic body and then transferred his memories into it, just like they did with Gray. And back on Discovery, they also magically invent a way to use the spore drive in a way that was never done before, and apparently they could have done it all along, because, you know, they don't have any new technology or anything. They suddenly figure out that they can make other objects jump instead of them when they use the spore jump. So why the hell did they never use that before, if that was possible? Suddenly we are told that the Discovery can actually do a saucer separation, so it separates into two parts, and they position themselves as two poles around the Breen ship, and are then able to use the spore drive to make the Breen ship spin and disappear. So they send the Breen ship to the edge of the galaxy. They say they are sending it to the galactic barrier, and it will take them a few decades to come back. So why the hell did they never think of doing that before? You know, they faced bigger ships and stronger ships multiple times before, and yet no one ever suggested that, and suddenly on the spot they invented this way to teleport enemy ships away. So that was really ridiculous. And also when Stamets asked Raynor where to send the Breen ship, he just said the galactic barrier, but he didn't say to which side of the galaxy exactly. I mean, the galactic barrier can also be pretty close by. Didn't they go to the galactic barrier in the original series on the old Enterprise? They actually got to the galactic barrier with normal engines, and so he simply says the galactic barrier. But if it's a region close by to the Federation, then it wouldn't take them that long to come back, and yet he says it will take them decades to come back. So shouldn't they have said they're sending them to the galactic barrier on the other side of the galaxy? Then it will sound a little bit more plausible, instead of just randomly saying, oh, just the galactic barrier. So it can be any one of the sides of the galaxies. Do the writers think the galactic barrier is just in one spot of the galaxy? Like it's not everywhere around the galaxy, it's just in one specific spot there is a galactic barrier? I guess that's the explanation. So nothing makes any sense if you actually analyze it, as always. So after finally getting rid of the Breen and Michael coming out of that portal to Book's shuttle, they are finally able to secure the portal in the Discovery's cargo bay. And yet right after that we have a scene of Michael telling the crew that she decided not to keep this technology. She decided to just throw it away into the black hole and make it disappear. She says that we already have infinite diversity in infinite combinations and we don't really need this technology. And then they throw it away into the black hole, making this whole season pointless. So if they don't actually need it, then why the hell were they chasing it around for the whole season? And you know, if there was still a danger of the enemy getting their hands on it, then maybe it will make sense to make this decision. Maybe Michael will throw it into the black hole to prevent the Breen from getting it. Then they will have no complaints, just like, you know, Picard blew up the Iconian outpost because he didn't want the Romulans to get their hands on it. That's why he had to blow it up. But if there was no Romulan threat, I'm sure he would not have done that. So here it makes no sense. After they already won against the Breen, now they decide to throw it into the black hole and get rid of it. It would have made more sense to do it when the Breen were still a threat. And so it's the same story as in the end of Season 2 of Discovery, when after defeating Control, they still had to jump in time to the far future so that Control will not find them, even though they already defeated Control at that point. So it made no sense then, the same way as it doesn't make any sense now. Since they don't have any threats anymore, they can safe keep this technology in the hands of the Federation. They can classify it and all of that, and keep it only for the purpose of exploration and advancement of science, maybe terraform other planets to make the galaxy more habitable with all this advanced technology. Instead, Michael simply decides by herself to simply get rid of it. Oh no, we don't really need diversity anymore. We have enough diverse people in the galaxy, we have enough planets, and so let's just get rid of this technology. Let's throw it into a black hole. So what the hell was the whole point of this season if in the end they just throw it away and nothing actually changes. They gained nothing from this whole season. So this is really ridiculous in so many ways. And they show only one character who is actually disappointed by that, and that is Stamens. At least it fits his character development, since in the very first appearance of him, he said that the reason he became a scientist was because of the mysteries of the universe and life and where life came from and that whole spore network and all of that. It's also disappointing how they never tied anything to the spore network. You know, I theorized early on maybe they'll do a full circle and reveal that the progenitors use the spore network to seed life in the galaxy. That's actually what Stamens himself said in his first appearance in season 1, that he thinks the spore network is the progenitor of all life in the galaxy and all of that, and yet they never thought about tying all these things together. They just showed the progenitors having Iconian technology for some reason, and they didn't actually show how they did any of the things they did, and so Stamens at least is shown to be disappointed, but he quickly understands that it's for the best. And then Adira cheers him up by saying, oh, it's the journey that matters, not the destination. We learned so much on the journey, which is so much BS, because that progenitor tech could have been really useful, you know. They could have done a spin-off show, which would be like a Stargate show, with this kind of network of Stargates in the whole galaxy. They could have used this to terraform other planets, to create even more life in the galaxy. And then Book comes to talk with Shin Hoti to cheer her up. And that's another cop-out, because they've been building up that he has some kind of connection with her because her father was his best friend or something, and yet they didn't actually do anything with it. So he never managed to convince her to come back to the good side or something. He never managed to do any of that. So what was even the point of setting up that connection of her being his only remaining family and stuff like that that he kept saying, and yet he didn't even do anything in the end, anything useful to convince her to switch sides or anything. So he just comes to her in the end to have a little chit chat. And then they reveal that she's going to be recruited by Kovich, because Kovich thinks that she can be a very useful Mary Sue, and so he's going to recruit her into his Section 31. They didn't actually say it, but that's what it's implied, that he's sending special people on special missions. And so he's going to recruit Shin Hoti. And Shin Hoti is probably the worst villain in this whole show, because they keep trying to make her kind of likable, I guess, that everyone loves her. She's basically the Mary Sue of villains. And she's kind of overpowered without any logical explanation, just like Michael. She knows it all, she's the best at everything, she's all-powerful, she can beat anyone up easily, everyone loves her for some reason, and even despite all the bad things she did in this season, they are still thinking of making her an ally. So that is absolutely ridiculous. And then Michael visits Kovich in his office, and then we see that he has a bunch of memorabilia from the Star Trek universe. He has Picard's wine, he has Sisko's baseball, he has Geordi's visor, and a bunch of other stuff from all the other Star Trek shows, and so that was really funny. And then Michael says, Kovich is not your real name, is it? It's just a code name. Who are you really? And it's so funny that she's been working for this guy for 3 years, for 3 whole seasons, obeying his orders, and only now she wonders who the hell he is. And then he reveals that he's actually Agent Daniels from the USS Enterprise. And that made me facepalm so hard, because not only does he not look anything like Daniels and not behaving like him in any way, but also there is a big mistake in the continuity when he says that he's from the USS Enterprise, but Archer's Enterprise was not USS, it was NX-01. So if this is Daniels, who was a crewman on Archer's Enterprise, why the hell does he say he's from the USS Enterprise? And so this was a glaring plot hole. Maybe they can explain it by saying he actually originated from Kirk's Enterprise, and then later he got recruited by the Temporal Police, and then later was sent to an even earlier NX-01 Enterprise. I guess I can come up with excuses, but it's obvious that the writers simply messed it up. And it's really annoying because, you know, tying things up too much makes the universe smaller, and so of course it's Daniels that we saw in Enterprise. Even though he looks nothing like him, he acts nothing like him. It would have been so much more interesting if he was the evil future guy that we never learn who that was in Enterprise, that remained a mystery forever. So it would have been much more interesting if he was revealed to be that guy. And maybe the writers heard all the speculations about that, and they simply made a mistake. They thought future guy, oh, they must mean Daniels from Enterprise, and so they made him Daniels, which they thought that's what the fans wanted. But the fans wanted him to be revealed to be future guy. One of the reasons is simply we never knew who that guy was, and so that remains an open thread that was never finished, and so that's annoying by itself. So having some kind of explanation, some kind of revelation would have been interesting. But making this guy Daniels is absolutely pointless in my opinion, and it's just annoying, especially with this glaring mistake of him saying that he is Agent Daniels from the USS Enterprise, when they obviously meant the Daniels from the NX-01 Enterprise, and so they messed it up in the dialogue. And then it jumps a few weeks ahead, and we see Saru's wedding to the Vulcan president, and Detmer and Mrs. T are still missing from it. I looked at it closely, I looked at all the guests at his wedding, and they were not there. So are they still piloting the ISS Enterprise back to Starfleet? Because, that was the excuse of why they suddenly disappeared from this season. In the middle of the season, they were told to take the ISS Enterprise from the Mirror Universe back to Federation Space, and so it's been several weeks after the end, and they still haven't come back. They didn't want to attend the wedding of their dear friend Saru, who they knew for years, and yet they are still missing from this episode, so this is ridiculous. And they did show up in the very end when Michael has some kind of dream sequence of seeing her old crew. I'll get to that later, and only then they showed up for a few seconds. But here in Saru's wedding, they are totally missing. Even the snake aliens showed up, the ones we saw briefly in one episode of this season. Even those snake aliens came to Saru's wedding, and yet Mrs. T and Detmer never showed up. Only the replacements, only the discount Mrs. T was there, but not the real one. And then Book shows up, and they all have strange haircuts, and he takes Michael to a walk on the beach, and he tells her that his sentence was commuted, he's totally free now. All he really did was commit mutiny, attack a Federation starship, try to commit genocide with a weapon of mass destruction, that kind of thing, not a big deal. So of course he's forgiven. Just like Shin Hoti is going to be forgiven for everything despite all the things she did, all the people she killed, it's all no big deal. She'll just get a slap on the wrist, just like Book. And so Book and Michael kiss because they're coming back together now suddenly, and there's a giant lens flare behind them, and I thought, okay, thank God this show is over. I'm glad it's ending, but suddenly, oh no, it's not the end. Suddenly we have yet another time jump to a more distant future, and suddenly Michael is old. She has a ridiculous old makeup on her, basically just a touch of gray and a little bit of wrinkles, but she basically looks exactly the same. And yet it's decades later apparently, and she and Book are still together, living happily ever after in a big house on that planet. I guess that's the same planet that he put those giant worms on, those worms that he was saving from the whole galaxy that originated from his planet, but he put them all on some kind of sanctuary planet with red vegetation. And they also showed that he planted that world root from his planet. He planted it there and it simply grew into a tree. That's another missed opportunity. Remember how they set it up that his planet has some kind of special world root that is connecting all the life forms on that planet, and then he was given a piece of it in that library, and so people assumed maybe when he finds the progenitor technology he will try to use it to revive his whole planet or something, but they never did any of that. Instead he simply planted it and it grew into a tree, and that's it. So they live in this house together, and then Michael goes out to fix some fence, and then we see a Starfleet shuttle arriving and someone beaming down, and it's apparently the son of Michael and Book, who is also a Starfleet captain. And Michael then reveals that she's a Starfleet admiral, of course. And so they all pat each other on the back, saying how amazing they all are and all of that. And I keep thinking how funny it will be to hear their family stories. Like if their son once asked his father how he met his mother, how ridiculous will it sound? Just imagine that, when he was little. Daddy, can you tell me about the time you met mommy? And then Book says, of course, son. It all started when your mother knocked my ship out of the sky because she flew in some magical Red Angel suit. Then we both fell down to a planet. Then we fought each other and tried to kill each other. Then I betrayed her and sold her off to some slavers and wanted to leave her there. Then I allowed my giant worm to eat her alive and then spit her out. Then later I joined the crew of her ship, but then betrayed her and her ship and tried to commit genocide against an alien species. but then she forgave me for everything and we've been together ever since. And you know, this whole episode has like multiple endings. It feels really like the ending of Return of the King, you know, when they keep having a scene that looks like the last scene, and then it fades to black, but then it fades into yet another scene, which also seems like the last scene, and then it keeps going and going and going. That's exactly how this episode felt like. It had multiple endings and just kept going and going until I was screaming at the screen, just be over already. I want it to end. Please end my suffering already. Why wouldn't it end? And it keeps going, and then Michael's son, who is a captain, takes her to Starfleet headquarters, and she lectures him about how to be a good captain. And she also tells him how Tilly is still an instructor at Starfleet Academy after all these decades. She's the longest running instructor at the Academy. And I kept thinking, thank God they're not showing us the older Tilly. Because, you know, judging by how much she changed throughout a few seasons, seeing her a few decades later might be a problem. She might not fit in the screen if they try to do that, so luckily they didn't. And then they see the Discovery is docked in the shipyard, and then we see those robots erasing the letter A from the hull, and apparently refitting the ship to look like it did in the first season of the show. And I immediately knew where they're going with it. You know, one of my complaints was how they never explained that short trek Calypso, in which the Discovery looked like it did in the first two seasons, without the letter A before the refit, and yet it had Zora, and Zora said that she was waiting for 1,000 years in some nebula, and then that guy called Kraft arrived, and she helped him out, and I was totally sure they forgot all about it, and are never going to explain it, and yet apparently in the very last moment, suddenly they want to somehow explain it, and as always they do it in a ridiculous way that makes no sense. So for some reason they are refitting the whole ship to look like it did in the first two seasons, and they specifically show that they are erasing the letter A, making the ship look like it did before, but it still has Zora. And then Michael comes aboard the ship and is basically explaining to Zora that she has to take the ship on a secret mission and to wait somewhere out in space because of some new red directive, and she cannot tell her the details, but it has something to do with something called craft, which might be a person or a ship. She doesn't seem to know herself, and they're sending Zora on this mission to wait somewhere for 1,000 years until she meets this craft. And so, you know, if they didn't mention craft, maybe I would be okay with that scene. Maybe I'll be happy they're finally tying up that one loose end. But how the hell would they know about Kraft, who hasn't been born yet for 1,000 years? And you know, they said in the show that time travel is banned, so they shouldn't really know anything about the future, even though Kovich is apparently Daniels, and so maybe that can explain it. Somehow he knows that it's very important to save this one guy called Kraft, and they have to do it in this convoluted way of leaving this super advanced ship, which has a one-of-a-kind spore drive. They had to leave it somewhere out in space for 1,000 years, and Zora is an intelligent computer. Remember in the previous season they had a whole episode about Zora having a nervous breakdown, and they had to give it therapy sessions. They had to get Gray to play chess with it to cheer it up because Zora was depressed, it wouldn't follow orders and all of that, and yet they are planning to send Zora on this mission all by herself to wait somewhere for 1,000 years. How can they know that she will not go nuts in that time, since apparently she's a sentient entity that requires people's company and all of that? They showed that in the previous season, that she got depressed and had to get a therapy session and had to get cheered up by people playing chess with it. And so they're planning to deliberately leave her out in space. You know, if they somehow explained it all happened by accident, then it will be okay. You know, maybe they sent her on some special mission by herself, that's okay. But the fact that they're planning it all out in advance, and they know somehow that some guy named Kraft is going to arrive there, and that's why they're setting it all up just to fit in with that short trek, it probably would have been better off simply not to explain it ever. We could have come up with more interesting ways to explain it than how they do it in this shoehorn way in the last moment. In a few seconds they have to suddenly tie it all up to explain it. So this is absolutely ridiculous. And then Michael sits in the chair one final time, and then has kind of a flashback scene of her meeting with all her bridge crew, and only now we finally see Detmer and Mrs. T for a few seconds, and it's all kind of a dream sequence or something, and then Michael says for the last time, let's fly, and then we see the Discovery spore jumping away. But wait, how exactly can it spore jump when it has no crew? They said all the crew left the ship, so who the hell pilots the spore drive? Maybe they finally figured out a way to do it without a pilot, but why exactly do they need to disguise the ship as if it's from the 23rd century, to hide it in a nebula to wait for another 1,000 years? Or did the Zora lie to Kraft when she said she was waiting for 1,000 years? I mean, in this scene, Michael does say that it will take longer than her lifetime, so they do imply that it will take yet another 1,000 years to get to the point of that other short trek. So it's basically 2,000 years after the time of when the ship originated from. It's all so convoluted and all so convenient and doesn't really make sense if we think about it, and that's really my biggest problem with this whole show. You know, I could forgive a lot of things, but things just not making any sense and being stupid, that's what's really most annoying in my opinion. And I will do a review of this whole series and I will rank all the seasons, but right now I can tell you that season 5, the last season, is no doubt the worst one of them all. It's the one that made the least sense, it's the one that was the least interesting and the most disappointing, especially with all the missed opportunities, because they had everything they needed to make at least one great episode, at least one decent episode. You know, they had the special effects, they had the sets, they had everything, they just had to have better writing, and then it could have been okay or even good. But they messed it all up because of their stupidity, and that is what I cannot forgive. So that's my thoughts. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it all in the comments below. I will be making many more videos, especially on my other channel, because I now have so much material for a lot of fun edits and funny stuff and compilations and fan edits and a lot of stuff I'm going to do, so I will still be very busy and I will be making many more reviews on this channel to sum up some of my thoughts about this whole show, and of course all the other Star Trek shows is something I will always be reviewing. So this channel is definitely not ending and I'm not going anywhere, but it is a big relief to know the Discovery is over. Maybe the next Star Trek shows will be better. So that's all for now and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.